Hi Year 4, Mrs Price here. I'm going to be doing your reading lesson with you today. Okay, so today's lesson, Year 4, is still practicing that retrieval viper skill, and we're going to be retrieving and recording information from the text. So today we're going to be looking at a new piece of text. This is from the same chapter as yesterday's, but it's a little bit further along. So I'm going to read it to you first. If you want to read it along with me, that's great. Or if you just want to have a listen and follow the text, you can do that too. Okay. I wanted to ask the new boy if the rumour about the kidnappers was true, and if he needed us to become his bodyguards. But he was still doing all his lessons on his own, and every break time and lunchtime he would disappear, so no one except for Clarissa could talk to him, and she didn't want to. I tried to catch his eye so I could smile at him and whisper hello, but Mrs. Khan caught me and told me to pay attention to my work. Next, I tried to send him a note made into a paper plane, because I'm good at those, but it flew wonkily and hit Nigel on the head instead. Okay, so well done. Now what we're going to do, I'm going to read the text to you again, but this time I'm going to miss some words out. So can you follow and see if you can fill in the word that I've missed out? Okay, so listen carefully as I pause, because that will be where I'm missing out a word. I wanted to ask the new boy if the rumour about the was true, and if he needed us to become his bodyguards. Okay, what word was missing in that sentence? That's right, kidnappers. Well done. But he was still doing all his lessons on his, and every break time and lunchtime he would disappear, so no one except for Clarissa could talk to him. Okay, what was missing that time in that sentence? Yes, that's right, it was own. Well done. Keep going. And she didn't want to. I tried to catch his eye so I could smile at him and whisper hello, but Mrs. Khan caught me and told me to pay attention to my... Okay, what did they need to pay their attention to? That's right, to their work. Well done. Next, I tried to send him a note made into a paper, because I'm good at those, but it flew wonkily and hit Nigel on the head instead. Okay, what was missing that time? Well done, it was plain. Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to be thinking about skimming and scanning again this lesson. So it's a bit of a check lesson. We're going to be reminding ourselves that skimming is where we quickly read a text to get an idea of what the text is about. And we're going to be focusing in on our scanning skills again, where we're glancing quickly over a text to find a key word or phrase. Now it's slightly different today, because instead of looking for a specific word, we're going to be looking for a word which means the same as. Can you remember what two words, the word for something which has the same meaning as something else? It's called a synonym. So we're going to see if we can think of a synonym for the word gossip. Can you scan the text to find a word which means the same as gossip? So pause the video and off you go. Okay, so well done. Did you search the text or scan the text and find the word rumour? That's right, if something isn't true, possibly not true or exaggerated, it could be a rumour or gossip. Well done. Let's have a go at another one. Okay, so this time you're going to scan the text to find a synonym, so a word which means the same as vanish. So pause the video and have a look through the text, scan it to find a word with the same meaning. Off you go. So hopefully you found this word, disappear. Okay, if something disappears, it vanishes. Well done. Brilliant. Okay, so just before I read the next chapter of our book to you, I want to see if you can have a think about today's think question. Okay, so think about the story so far. And how did the narrator feel when the paper plane hit Nigel on the head? Okay, so imagine, put yourself in the shoes of that narrator. How do you think they felt when that plane hit Nigel on the head? Okay, you can jot some ideas down in your book, and then tomorrow Mrs. Evans will go through that with you at the start of her lesson. You can jot some ideas down, you can talk to someone about it, or you can just have a good think to yourself. Okay.
Okay, so chapter 6, The Woman in the Silver Scarf. As soon as I got to the bus stop the next day, I told Josie and Tom and Michael everything my mum had told me about refugee kids and about how the new boy had probably had to get on a boat with no toilets on it so that he could run away from bombs and all the other bad things that the bullies had done to his country. But my dad said refugee kids are dangerous and that they lie and steal, said Josie, looking confused. He told me to stay away from the new boy and not to talk to him because he was probably a criminal. But my mum and dad said we should be extra nice to him. Look! And opening up his rucksack, Tom showed us a big bag of sweets. Mum said to give these to him at lunchtime. And she said we were to be nice to him and not to ask him too many questions. My mum said the same, said Michael, as we got on the bus to school, except she told me to give him a banana. And my dad said refugee kids were running away from the war that's on the television all the time. He didn't say anything about any bullies. We all looked over at Josie, who was chewing on the ends of her hair and frowning. She didn't say anything, but I knew that she was thinking that her dad must have made a mistake. There was no way the new boy could be dangerous or a criminal, not when he was about the same size as us and had just run away from bullies and a real war. Mr. Thompson had taught us all about wars last year. It had been a special year for wars, and Mrs. Sanders had said it was our duty not to forget about them. We learned about red poppies and how they grew. They were the most important flowers before they grew on soldiers' graves. And about how lots of countries had joined up to fight in that very first war. The upper years did an assembly about it, and we went on a special day trip to the Tower of London, where the Queen keeps her crown, because that's where millions of red poppies have been put in its gardens and stuck on the walls. Mr. Thompson said we should never forget how many people had died in the war to save us, but I can't remember long numbers, especially ones that keep going up all the time. But I'll never forget that castle. It had looked like it was bleeding. And later on that day, a man who knew all about the first big war gave us an extra special lesson inside the castle. His name was Officer Denny. I remember him because his name rhymed with my Uncle Lenny's. Everyone liked him because he was funny and he knew everything there was to know about bombs and uniforms and a sad place called Flanders Field. He picked me and Michael to try and hold up a rucksack that was the same size and weight as a real soldier's rucksack, but it was so big and heavy that we couldn't even lift it off the ground. Remembering Officer Denny's rucksack made me wonder if the new boy had to carry lots of heavy things in his rucksack when he was running away. Maybe that's why it looks so old and dusty. He still didn't have a new one, but that week he had started to wear the school uniform. He must have found the new shirt and jumper itchy because he kept pulling at the collar whenever he thought no one was looking. That day the bus to school was late and got stuck in so much traffic that the driver let everyone get off early. We had to run half the way, and by the time we got to the playground, the bell had started ringing. I was hot and sweaty and feeling icky when we got into class, so I didn't realise that everyone was quieter than usual. But after a few minutes, I noticed that Pavinda and Dean, who were clever at everything and sat at the front of the class, kept looking over their shoulders. At first I thought they were looking at me because my face was still red, but then I heard Pavinda say, "Wonder who she is." I turned around and saw a grown-up sitting in Clarissa's seat, and not just any old grown-up, but one who was talking to the new boy, and the new boy was talking back to her. I poked Josie in the arm and said, "Look." Josie turned around and whispered, "Where's Clarissa?" We looked around the classroom and then saw that Clarissa was sitting at the end of our row on Felicity and Natasha's table. She looked much happier. "Hurry up and settle, please," said Mrs. Khan as she picked up the register. "Before we head to assembly, I want to introduce someone very special to you. But first of all, let's make sure you're all here." After she finished calling everyone's names, Mrs. Khan said, "Now, class, I want you all to say good morning to Ms. Hemsey, our new class assistant." Miss Hemsey stood up and smiled at everyone. "Good morning, Miss Hemsey," we all said. Half the class shouted it out and the other half said it quietly, as if they weren't quite sure Mrs. Khan had given them the right name to say. I shouted it out. I like shouting out new names. It makes them feel more real. Miss Hemsey smiled and said, "Good morning, everyone." Miss Hemsey will be helping Amit with his lessons from now on. If we're lucky, in a few weeks, she will be helping Amit do a presentation about his hometown and how he feels about being here in London. Everyone turned to stare at Miss Hemsey as she nodded and smiled and then sat back down again. "She looks nice," whispered Josie. "I like her scarf." I looked back over my shoulder because I liked the scarf Miss Hemsey was wearing on her head too. It looked like a silver ring and it had a diamond pin clipped onto one of the sides that looked like a star. She had one of those smiles where the person smiling never shows any teeth, but I liked it. And her eyes looked like they'd been drawn around with thick black pencil, which made them look bigger and more interesting. The new boy seemed to like her too, and when she sat back down, she whispered something to him and patted him on the back, which made him nod. I felt happy for him. He had someone to talk to, and he didn't have to sit next to Clarissa anymore. It's much nicer to sit next to someone who isn't always trying to get away from you all the time and has a diamond pin in her scarf. All that day the new boy did his lessons at the back of the class, and at break time and lunchtime he went to seclusion as usual. But maybe because Miss Hemsey was with him, he didn't look at the ground so much and seemed more interested in everything we were doing. I caught him staring at me and Josie twice before lunchtime and 3 whole times in the afternoon, and I was sure he wanted to be friends with us now. At home time we waited, just as we always did, by the gates, but this time all of us had something to give him. Josie had saved her chocolate yoghurt pudding from her lunchbox for him especially, and Michael and Tom had the bag of sweets and the banana their mums and dads had told them to save. Today I had an apple to give him because the school canteen had run out of oranges, but it was okay because Tom had given me a sticker of a whale to put on it, so it was still special. As we were waiting, I crossed my fingers and secretly hoped that Miss Hemsey would come out with the new boy too, because since she could speak to him properly, she would be able to ask him some of my 11 questions. The playground had started to empty by the time the new boy finally came out. holding both Miss Hemsley's and Mrs. Carne's hands. As they made their way over to the woman in the red scarf, Michael whispered, "Come on." I could tell he was excited because his eyes had gotten wider. Michael's eyes always get wider when he can't wait to do something. We all ran over to the new boy and gave him our gifts. "This is from me," said Tom, holding out the large bag of sweets like it was a trophy. "There are cola bottles in there and flying whiz-bees and some toffee melts too." "And this is from me," said Josie, holding out the chocolate pudding. "It's my favourite." This is just a banana. But look," said Michael, turning it over to show the new boy the row of stick men he'd drawn on it. "And this is from me," I said, holding out the apple. The new boy looked up, his arms full, and gave us each a happy nod. I could tell it was a happy nod and not just an ordinary nod, because even though his mouth wasn't smiling, his lion eyes looked happy. Miss Hemsley bent down and said something in a foreign language into the new boy's ears. He nodded and then, looking up at us, said very slowly, "Thank you, friends." Josie, Michael, Tom and me nodded and beamed, and then all at once started talking. "Do you want to come to play football with us tomorrow?" shouted Tom, "at break time?" I'll get you another one of those puddings tomorrow if you like them," exclaimed Josie. "I'll ask Mum to get something better than a banana," cried out Tom. "What about some mini muffins?" "And I'm going to get something better than an apple tomorrow. What's your favourite fruit?" I asked. The new boy looked at us and then looked up at Miss Hemsley and Mrs. Carne and then at the woman in the red scarf. They were all smiling, and the woman in the red scarf ruffled his hair just like my mum had ruffled my hair the night before. "Now, kids," said Mrs. Carne, bending down so that her face was the same height as ours, "these are all wonderful gifts, and I know Ahmet is so thankful for them. But he needs to learn just a little bit more English before he can answer your questions, okay?" We all looked at each other and then at Mrs. Carne, and then we nodded. "But I do think that's a very good idea of yours, Tom. Maybe Ahmet would like to play football with you tomorrow at break time." Mrs. Carne looked over at Miss Hemsley, who gave a nod. "Yes, that's a really good idea." "Awesome," said Tom, and he was so excited that he gave the new boy a thump on the arm. The new boy looked at Tom and then at his arm as if he wasn't quite sure what had just happened. "And there's no need to give him so many presents every day," said the woman in the red scarf, laughing. "It's so lovely, but we don't want to rot Ahmet's teeth now, do we?" We all shook our heads. "If you still want to give him something at home time, just choose one thing between you all, and that'll be more than enough, okay?" We all nodded, and then I cried out, "Miss Hemsley!" I hadn't meant to say it so loudly, but I was so excited at the thought of having one of my questions answered that I couldn't help myself. "Yes," smiled Miss Hemsley. Can I, where is he from? Like, which country, and what language does he speak?" I asked, looking at the new boy. Miss Hemsley's smile widened, even though she still didn't show any of her teeth. "Ahmet is from a country called Syria, and he speaks a language called Kurdish." "Do you speak that and English?" asked Josie, looking impressed. "Yes," said Miss Hemsley, "I'm Syrian too." "Why doesn't Ahmet speak any English?" asked Tom. "Well," said Miss Hemsley, "because in Syria nobody needs to speak English, just like you don't need to speak a Syrian language here in England." Oh, the answer made Tom frown to himself, which meant he was asking himself lots of other questions in his head. "Now, kids, off you go," said Mrs. Carne, clapping her hands. "Ahmet needs to get going, and so do you. And Tom, I notice you're wearing your brother's trainers by mistake again. Try and make it the last time, okay?" "Yes, miss," said Tom as he turned bright red. We waved goodbye and headed to the bus stop. Just before we turned the corner, I looked over my shoulder and saw the new boy take a big bite out of the apple I'd given him. I felt even happier than I did when Miss Hemsley had answered my questions. But a second later, the feeling quickly disappeared because that was when I saw Brendan the bully. He was standing in front of the boys' toilets just a few yards away, and his cheeks were pink and his eyes were narrow, and he was watching the new boy with a scowl on his face. Everyone knows that Brendan the bully hates anyone who's different from him, but it was the first time I'd seen him look so angry and mean. He couldn't do anything because Miss Hemsley and Mrs. Khan and the lady in the red scarf were there, but as we headed to our bus stop and all the way home, I couldn't help but feel worried. I think I knew right away that that scowl was a warning and that he was going to make things hard for the new boy and anyone who wanted to be friends with him. And as it turns out, I was right, because at first break on the very next day, that's exactly what he started doing. And you'll have to find out tomorrow what happens.